Welcome to Scripture's 4 C's, Insights. Insights into sacred Scripture. And now, insights and sort of a review of the first week of your prayer and meditation on Pope John Paul II's reflections on Humanae Vitae. And again, I think you're now starting to see the significance of studying the teachings of the Holy Father on this most important subject. Because if you've taken the time now to read both of these documents a little bit each day, to underline them, to pray them, not just read, but to pray them, and allow God to truly lay out for you His plan for happiness. We have with us once again Father John Hardon, our theological director, in giving you his insights on these most important documents. And Father, starting off in pages 7 and 8, the Holy Father talks about the 2 significances of the marital act. Do you want to describe them, please?
Neil? We first should distinguish, as the Holy Father does, between what he calls the objective, the ontological purpose of the marital act, and the subjective or the psychological experience which the couple obtain from the marital act. And what he is at pains to point out is that we may never separate these two in the sense of seeking psychological satisfaction, subjective experience, while excluding the built-in purpose that God has given to marital intercourse. The reason why the separation of those 2 functions is so devastating is that once the separation was made, and it has been made, then the purpose of having intercourse, and doesn't even have to be marital intercourse, becomes uniquely the psychological, subjective, sexual satisfaction that not only a couple may derive, but even the solitary individual. I have a line up here of 4 tragic consequences that follow by separating the objective from the subjective. Once that separation is made, and if you say that contraception is permissible, and a couple may legitimately experience sex pleasure while deliberately excluding the prospect of conception, then, logically, there is nothing to prevent those 2 individuals to say, well, if I may legitimately experience sex pleasure while excluding the prospect of conception when I'm with my partner, why can I not have this experience alone? And that is why solitary sex pleasure, masturbation, has become such a widespread phenomenon. Secondly,
just on that one subject, I know one of the we were listening to a sex education program by a prominent Protestant minister, and it was really very good. And then he got on the subject of masturbation, and he said, and just in the area there, he said, I can't really give any guidelines there because of the incredible drives for young men at that time. They're not held responsible for it, and so you can just see the start to veer from
it's
basics.
Wrong. Right. There was in the Church's teaching is that objectively every act of masturbation is objectively a mortal sin. Right. The degree of guilt God judges.
But it is a mortal sin.
Yes, but the logic follows. If, in other words, if husband and wife can enjoy their sexual experience without intending conception, what real difference does it make?
Right.
Again, in reality, whether the two of them are together or whether they are separated.
Once you break from that concept, right?
And secondly, homosexuality. Once you permit contraception, and you allow that as a perfectly licit action, there is nothing, really, in the logic of the human mind which would tell a person that if I can enjoy sexual experience with my married partner and exclude the possibility of conception, what's to keep me? There's no moral, then, reason why I should not or I may not experience sex pleasure with a person of the same sex as myself.
Right.
Homosexuality. Thirdly, if married people can exclude the possibility or the prospect, interfere with conception, and enjoy sexual pleasure, what's to keep those who are not married from doing the same? Indeed, it is the use of contraceptives that has just opened up an ocean of sexual promiscuity, where the pattern was set by married people who deliberately interfered with conception.
And it just, the floodgates are now open.
Floodgates.
And you're seeing it even in schools, Father, where they come in, and we saw back in the 60s when they were coming out with the sex education programs, because of the venereal disease rate, they said, well, we have to have sex education in the schools. And now it is so out of control, premarital sex in schools, that you now have programs coming in where they're now teaching them how to use contraceptives in schools so that they have a responsible sexual life, you know. And this is being on news programs, this is being on regular television programs, and you're seeing this.
So that
it's unbelievable.
What we said before, Jerry, about a contraceptive society inevitably becoming an abortive society, we can say a contraceptive society becomes invariably a masturbation society, a homosexual society, a fornication society, and my last term, an adulterous society.
That's right, where infidelity is just the standard today.
And the logic is right there. In other words, if you can legitimately experience the sex pleasure while excluding the possibility or the prospect of conception in marriage, once you isolate that pleasure as an end and a good in itself and separate it from the God-given correlative, which is the prospect of conceiving human life, then the bars are removed. Nothing, literally nothing in the order of sexual experience could logically be forbidden.
And I think this is, we're seeing this because when you break with one rule, then all rules are broken. It's just like a guy goes out and commits murder and he knows he's going to be condemned to death, and he says, well, my gosh, I broke that law, I might as well just keep going, and that's what we're doing in this our society.
And one of the tragedies in our society, because we are democratic, politically speaking, is that going all the way back, for example, to the 2 volumes you've heard about Kinsey, Dr. Kinsey.
Yes, right.
They cost me $17 a piece, the 2 books that I bought years ago from Indiana University. Huge tomes in which Kinsey interviewed thousands of men and then separately thousands of women about their sexual behavior. Well, first of all, given the persons whom he interviewed, and given already then the climate of the United States, his conclusion was inevitable. Most men and most women after a certain age, or as the expression goes, sexually active.
Yeah, right.
Well, what we are now seeing, sadly, even in some nominally Catholic circles, people appealing to statistics. So many Catholics are practicing contraception, such a percentage. Therefore, may God forgive those who draw that conclusion. Therefore, it is morally legitimate.
Yeah, and the majority rules. Whatever the majority wants, that's the morality of our time.
And indeed, and this is what's happening with our young people. Almost everything they see, almost everything they hear, just about everything they read, and now in sex education programs, in one city after another. What are they learning? They are learning that sex experience may legitimately be had outside of marriage and within marriage, apart from the prospect of conception. But I want to come back. It was contraception. It was Planned Parenthood. It was Margaret Sanger. It was those people who once they had sold our American public of the legitimacy of separating the objective from the subjective in the marital act between husband and wife, that you can subjectively, psychologically enjoy sex and exclude the prospect of conception. If you can do that, quite frankly, what are you not then allowed to experience sexually? And the answer is, there is no limit.
Right. And I guess it really all started with the pill. I mean, the big push really took place with the pill. When the pharmaceutical companies got in and they said they can really get into a big business here, and that's really where the money went into it.
Let me tell you, I was teaching then, it was in the 60s, between 62 and 67. I was teaching at Western Michigan State University, which happens to be, as you know, in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Now, Kalamazoo is the center of one of the nation's largest pharmaceutical firms, the Upjohn. A very fine Catholic doctor, a gynecologist, by the name of John Kavanaugh, resident and active in Kalamazoo. He was meeting all kinds of criticism from among his own fellow medical practitioners on contraception. And in Kalamazoo, that's the city where some of the most effective and larger selling contraceptives are manufactured. So Dr. Kavanaugh suggested that he call a meeting of every able-bodied medical man in the city who could possibly, in a good conscience, absent himself from his office and come to a meeting at Upjohn. I believe there were 54 doctors, including many from the Upjohn firm, including, I should add, a Catholic who is among the research specialists in the manufacture of contraceptives. I am pleased to report that after about 2.5 hours of a very lively, oh, how lively, discussion is not the word, that we had, I gave the church's position on contraception, and the doctors just badgered me and battered me with all kinds of arguments. Well, thank God I stood my ground. I am happy to report that the top research specialist on the manufacture of contraceptives at Upjohn was a Catholic. And after the program, he came to me and said, "Father, I have decided to leave Upjohn and research in the manufacture of contraceptives." And I must say that the arguments I used, and we should go into this, I think, in one of our conferences, at least one, the arguments that we can muster in favor of the Church's teaching forbidding contraception are very sound, very solid, on purely scientific and psychological grounds. In other words, you permit contraception and you open the floodgates of sexual vice. Do you agree?
Absolutely. We've seen it already. It's just destroyed our society already.
So that it is not only the Church's teaching that is our motive, in this case for, say, not practicing contraception. It is just good, plain, common sense.
Right.
So much so that I think, even though we should appeal to the Church's authority, but over the years, how many years, in teaching the relationship of faith and reason to my students, especially at St. John's University in New York, I've gone out of my way to point out to them, not only is there no contradiction between faith and reason, in this case, what the Church's authority that we accept on faith tells us, contraception is a sin. There is no contradiction between the Church's teaching, whose authority we accept on faith, and what we can prove scientifically through the most exact measurements of modern research. In other words, not only do we find, for example now, among those who practice homosexuality, disease which
That's right, Dad.
they acquire, which becomes, in many cases, incurable.
Even Scripture said that. When
Yes. So that, in other words, in teaching the faithful not to practice contraception, we should on the one hand muster all the arguments from reason, the benefits of living a chaste marital life. I think we should have a whole conference just on chastity in marriage.
We'll do that on our next conference, because I think already the statistics and the people in natural family planning finding that people that are not using contraceptives are not being, the divorce rate is so much lower, and there's no question about it. Therefore, the happiness of their families.
Healthy husband and wife,
Right.
healthier offspring. All of these are benefits that can be proved statistically and scientifically. In other words, reason is not only not in conflict with faith, but supports and confirms what we believe.
Because when you see a mother of 12 children or 13 or 21 children and you see how attractive they are and young, here we have my wife Gwen, my sister Mary Ann, and we know a couple that has 21 children, and you just never know it by looking at the woman, and she looks, and God again takes care, and when you're using natural means, it's amazing.
One thing that I didn't think I'd even bring up, but now that you have implied, there is such a thing as showing, even in one's deportment and facial expression, happiness.
Right.
In fact, in my book, the most beautiful persons are those who are most happy because they know they are doing the will of God. Agreed?
Right. Absolutely. And this is what we're made for. And I think in one other element, Father, just talking about in the natural family planning. We coined a phrase on one of our other shows called supernatural family planning. And I do feel that couples have to be careful in utilizing natural family planning, that they have to really discern God's will there and not just go into it.
Very much so. As you know, what we now call natural family planning,
right,
what used to be called the rhythm method, is not, in spite of what some people are saying, a modern discovery. In fact, already in the Old Testament, the Jewish people were forbidden to abstain from intercourse at certain times. In other words, they were to be fertile and multiply. So that the idea of a cycle
was always there, yeah,
is known from centuries back, now to modern times. It was Pius XI in Castico Nubiae, Pius XII in several documents, and then again Pope Paul VI, and once again Pope John Paul II tell us it is certainly legitimate to abstain from marital intercourse during certain times and to selectively have marital intercourse during periods that are known not to be fertile. Legitimate? Yes. But we may not say that because it is not a sin of contraception, which it is not.
right,
It is therefore ipso facto legitimate and permissible. No. Because there must be a good reason for abstaining, say, from intercourse during fertile periods in order not to have offspring.
right,
The motive must be a good motive. There was such a thing as selfish natural family planning.
right.
And therefore, though it is not, we would not say it is a sin of contraception, which is always, when fully deliberate, a mortal sin.
Right.
But we must say that in order to abstain from intercourse during periods that a person is known not to be able to bear children, I must be motivated by either charity or justice, for example, toward the children I already have. It is possible to be selfish in natural family planning.
Well, that's right, because if you're a young couple getting married and say, well, gee, I think we'll just hold off for 2 or 3 years and before we have our family and accumulate some money so we can buy a house. It just doesn't work that way. Somehow you never have enough money. And you end up, your tastes get more expensive and you spend more money and you never have those children.
And the gravity is more serious than I think some people realize. Because one of the purposes of marriage that God has built into the sacrament, speaking of Christians and Catholics, is for the procreation and education of children. It is quite conceivable that a couple never really intend to have children.
Right.
And then the question can come up, did they enter into a valid marriage?
That's right. So when you have situations like this, because when we got married, we had $300 in the bank, and that's all we had as savings, and we got married, and we didn't even think of, and neither did the other kids at the time that we grew up with. They all had children, and God will provide as you move into His will, but it's that lack of confidence today. So I think, Father, in closing on that note, because we really do, we're going to get into this, we're going to carry this theme that we just started now in our next programs, but supernatural family planning is something that we have to really consider, to do God's will and not our own, with reference to the most important act that we can perform as married couples and really cooperating with God and bringing human beings into the world that will live for all eternity. So we're going to break now for an hour, and you're going to discuss the first week's readings now on Pope John Paul's reflections and also on Pope Paul VI's writings on Humanae Vitae. And write down, just get into the habit in your books and underlining them and making notes and writing out your own insights and asking God to help you to draw more from these papal documents. They really have to be prayed. I feel that the Holy Father's documents are just like Scripture. They're divinely inspired. You pray and you reflect on them. You ask God to give you the light to truly understand what the Holy Father is teaching. So we'll be back in 60 minutes, and we ask the Holy Spirit now to please come down upon all of you now and to give you that grace and the light to do God's will. Thank you. God bless.